On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Russia is planning year-round navigation on the Northern Sea Route in early 2024. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So if we're going to be talking about Russia opening up the Polar Express, I couldn't think of anything more appropriate to wear than this shirt. Yes, my homage to Thomas Sullivan Magnum, the original one, Tom Selleck, not the reboot. That's terrible. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's head north. So this is the story over in G-Captain, Mike Schuller dealing with this, with Russia planning to open up this route. Now, this route has been around for a long time. And Russia, matter of fact, back in 2021, when our good buddy Ever Given went sideways in the Suez. I should also mention there was a ship this morning that went aground in the Suez, but it was cleared very quickly. But when Ever Given went sideways in the Suez in 2021, the Russians announced, hey, the Northern Sea Route is open for business, and they were hammering it hard, trying to get ships to divert to go to the north. Now, if it wasn't March, they may have gotten some takers there, but they didn't. Plus, the canal opened after 6 days, and so there was no issue with it. However, things have changed. With the Russia-Ukraine war going on for over a year now, with sanctions against Russia, concerns about Russian vessels being stopped on the high seas, the Northern Sea Route is a very appealing attraction to the Russians. So let's go ahead and take a look at this story in some detail. So this is the polar view, and what we're talking about here is the route on the far right, the light blue one. That is what's called the Northern Sea Route. Sometimes it's referred to as the Northeast Passage. It begins or ends, depending on which way you're going, between Alaska and Russia in the Bering Straits. It then proceeds along the northern coast of Russia and eventually exits between Iceland and Norway out into the North Sea. Now, the flip side of the Northern Sea Route is the Northwest Passage. This is the passage north of Alaska through Canada that empties out between Baffin Island and Greenland into the Atlantic. But the Russians really want to use the Northern Sea Route. The other route that's available there that's very infrequent use is the Transpolar Sea Route. That route is usually encumbered by ice and literally almost impenetrable. But there are prospects that with global warming, with the polar ice cap melting, that the Transpolar Sea Route could be available. And what that allows is, along the Northern Sea Route, there are several narrow choke points between Russian islands and the mainland that require icebreakers to basically ensure that they're clear. The Northern Sea Route doesn't have those tight areas where ice congregates. But again, it is the least likely to be open. What the Russians are talking about here is that Northern Sea Route. And when you look at how that route saves you time, it's immense right here. So again, another polar look here, looking at it. This is coming out of a northern Chinese port with distances to Rotterdam, also out of Korea, Busan, over there, and out of Yokohama. And what you see here is that the Northern Sea Route is much shorter in distance, saves you a huge amount of time. Plus, the Northern Sea Route avoids several tight areas where there could be potential pitfalls, choke points. You've got the Taiwan Strait, you have the South China Sea, you have the Straits of Malacca, you have the Bab el-Mandab, which is the very end of the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. You obviously have the Suez Canal, Straits of Sicily, you've got the Straits of Gibraltar, you've got the English Channel. The Northern Sea Route has its own kind of straits and choke points along the way, but they're all in the possession of either Russia or Russia and the United States. And the perception here is that this shorter sea route is going to be important going forward. Now, let's go ahead to the story and what was said about this sea route. So this all stemmed from a meeting with the Russian State Nuclear Energy Corporation, Rostom, and Russia's largest natural gas producer, Novatek. And what they announced at that meeting was that year-round navigation in the eastern portion of the Northern Sea Route will open as soon as next year. And Vladimir Putin himself was at this meeting, and he described the Northern Sea Route as extremely important. To quote Vlad Putin, and I don't usually do this, but I will for this story, "We must think about the future. The Northern Sea Route is opening up. Whether this is good or bad, it is happening. The Northern Sea Route is opening up." I get the impression that the Northern Sea Route is opening up, according to Putin here. Goes on here that this shipping route will tap into the vast Arctic natural resources, and particularly Russia gets a lot of oil and gas reserves, minerals from this region. It goes on here to say, "Together with Novatek, we are planning to launch year-round navigation in the eastern part of the NSR early next year. This is a truly historic decision, important for the development of the entire Arctic, and of particular importance for our country's economy." So right now, the Northern Sea Route has basically moving about 34 million tons of cargo. Now, that is up from 4 million back in 2014. But the argument here is that the NSR can support a capacity of up to 100 million tons by 2026 and potentially 200 million tons by 2030. Now, to reach that goal, there's going to have to be a lot of infrastructure upgrades, cargo hubs, ports, and more icebreaking vessels, as you see here. This is one of Russia's massive icebreaking vessels, nuclear powered, by the way. Not exactly sure if it breaks through the ice because of its sheer size or the heat generated from a Russian nuclear power plant. Yes, I'm joking. That last part's a joke. Now, this is going to be expensive. The estimated cost for this Northern Sea Route will require about 1.8 trillion rubles, which translates to about 22.4 billion US dollars. This includes 7.7 billion that's going to be funded by the Russian government. So again, you're talking about $30 billion in infrastructure going to this. According to the report, there are about 30 ships operating along the Northern Sea Route, with another 33 under construction. You just can't bring commercial vessels and operate them on this route. You do need to have ice-strengthened vessels because you will have floating ice in this region. Even though the ice cap is receding at times, you do still have growlers and small bergs that are occasionally up there. It goes on to talk about, overall, we will need up to 100 Arctic-class vessels as well as at least 15 floating energy units. This many new ships is, of course, a challenge for the domestic shipbuilding industry. And that's the issue here. Is Russia going to be building this? A lot of vessels for the Russian Merchant Marine come out of Korea. They're also going to need the training and crew to do this. By 2030 alone, we will need at least 7,500 crew members, taking into account the number of ships we require. This includes at least 1,500 crew for the nuclear icebreaking fleet. So Russia is making a determined opinion here to go ahead and develop the Arctic route. They're investing in it. They're investing in their ports along the Arctic, and they are going to be a big player. We also see China doing this, with China investing in icebreaker technology. I should mention that if you are an American from the United States, have no fear. We have a massive icebreaking fleet. No, we don't. We really don't. We have two large, heavy icebreakers of the Polar class, one of which is working because we steal the parts from the other one to get it running. And when it doesn't catch on fire, which unfortunately happens on a fairly regular basis. We have a medium-sized icebreaker, but when you're talking about the Arctic, you need a heavy icebreaker. Now, plans are to build an icebreaker. We are under plans to build one. VT Halter down in the Gulf region was awarded this contract, but VT Halter went bankrupt. They've now been purchased by Bollinger, and now Bollinger has the contract to build them, but they have not yet even started construction yet. Obviously, this is a situation where the U.S. faces an icebreaker gap. And this icebreaker gap can be of importance because Russia is going to develop this route. They're going to be able to control that route. Now, ships going into the Arctic route will pass the United States, principally Alaska, through the Aleutian Islands and the Bering Strait, but those are international waterways. They're able to get free passage in the Bering Strait. And so the U.S. is not going to have a lot to be able to say about this. Other nations have a say in this. Norway, Denmark obviously have a play in this because of their possessions. Iceland will have a play. Canada will have a play in this. But again, we're seeing nations like China building icebreakers. Why? Because China wants to have redundancy in their methods of transportation of goods. And the Arctic route, the Northern Sea route, or the Northeastern Passage, is a key one for them. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, give it a thumbs up and support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon. The link will be in the show notes below, or you'll see the icon come up at the end of the video. You can become a monthly or yearly subscriber. All right, I'm getting a little cool in here talking about the polar, so I'm going to go warm myself up. Until our next video, this is Sal signing off.